it's our stack. And
Yeah.
then from there, I tag things and I go, well, here's our business stack and here's our operational stack. And I can start slicing and dicing. Right now, I just have a Notion sandbox. I have a Claude sandbox. I have a GitHub sandbox. But I'm starting to play with capabilities because that's what we're centered on is all right, what do I need to be capable of?
The
I
cross
need to
APIs.
take
Right.
an issue, publish it to Slack, publish a list of things to Notion. And so what does a sandbox look like for that? But that's just for my team. And I'm also trying to support some of the design partners we're talking to, banks and different companies about the agentic thing, bringing it back
Yeah.
full circle to you is how can we be playing around and testing, but have it be safe, but also be relative to like our production environment, what we're trying to accomplish.
Yeah.
And so helping companies define their stack, and then have that available as a series of sandboxes and Git.
Okay.
So they can mock it in any way they want, do anything they want, and then generate agent skills from it, agent
Mm.
cards, whatever we need from it. And that's kind of where I'm at with this. But
Okay.
what really, you pinged me about the sandboxes and I want to learn more about context engineering and SDKs and I think this meeting of the mind. And I think to a certain degree, there's an overlap between what we're doing. There might be some competitive, but I'm really big on like this round. Like, let's have all the open APIs. Let's have it all in Git. Let's
Yeah.
have rich
No, I love that.
examples,
Yeah.
scenarios, and then we can stop competing off of that layer, which I think iPaaS and plenty of players have been just competing on that for years, just
Mm,
keeping those behind the scenes. And
definitely.
I have some other partners and vendors who agree and are willing to kind of put their open APIs on the table and
Nice.
make sure we all have a rich realm to work from. But yeah,
Yeah.
that's
And
where I'm at with it. So
and quick question on so what's like the first and primary use case of those sandboxes? So it sounds like you have your internal specs and you have some customer or design partners that have specs that they want to run something against. What's that like first use of it? Um,
well, I mean, it's just hello. So we're developing a framework that essentially think of it as an API consumption gateway. So it's pulling from Notion's API, and then on this side you have another gateway that then you could make calls to, and then some magic transformation, something budget management, something happens in the middle. That's the initial kind of like why we're
got it.
building the catalog is to build this kind of consumption gateway, this proxy. It's just a reverse, it's two gateways or two reverse proxies. So Notion coming in, pass through, Notion coming out, but you can issue your own keys. You could do
Got it.
you
Okay.
could do some budget management, that kind of stuff.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I reached out because this is like something we're looking at is how to evaluate API usage, like how well did the agent call the API? Did it use the right parameters? Did it do the steps in the right order? All these things.
Mhm.
And we're just take some MCP servers, create a code interface, and let the agent perform tasks, and use those APIs and MCP servers. Um, and to do that, um, there's like a million different degrees and how much you can measure and how precise you want to be on those measurements. Most of the frameworks out there are very imprecise. The eval frameworks, they'll just say, uh, given what the LLM says at the end, we'll just judge what it said and hope that it actually made all the right calls and in the right order with the right parameters. That's obviously not ideal and isn't really what we're trying to test. So initially, when we first started playing with this, we did something like a proxy, like what you're building, but very bare bones. That was actually just like a state control system that proxied all the upstream MCPs, where we could let the LLM start the eval from like a blank slate, and then we're storing state. There's something happening in all those MCP servers, and they're being modified upstream. And then when the eval ends, we can just say clear state, and it goes and and runs deletes basically on all
Mhm.
entities that were created upstream. And then it can restart from a blank slate on a new task. And we can actually look at state during the, or right at the end of the eval. We can say what's the current state of the upstream servers? Is it what we want? And then report back. And that's precise measurement of what happened upstream. What
Mhm.
was the impact on the upstream services? So that took a while to build, and we were like, we can't build this and everything else we're trying to make for context engineering. So it's kind of just an ongoing search for tool for the job right now on evals, because it's tricky.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think this reflects, I mean, the design partners we're talking to, many of them in my Rolodex, I worked with Postman and previously to help get their API management and API governance in place. And so these are teams that are generally designed first. They're open API driven. They're usually distributed, and then they've had to deal with the boss coming in and saying, "Oh, everything's MCP service now. That's all what we're doing. Keep doing what you were, but now do this
Now
additional work."
add
And
this.
so a lot of it is trying to bridge that. So we're coming at it from the very open API, and then I'm taking the governance that I've done for different groups and applying it at a consumption level. So how do you govern that open API to make sure everything from servers are using encryption to pagination is standardized, different things, and then we'll produce an MCP server is the goal. But it sounds like, what you're addressing is kind of the problem set that I'm seeing across a lot of our design partners too, is many of them are producing MCP servers from the open APIs. I have groups that are extending it with open API extensions and then generating MCP. But there's also many that are not, and they're just generating MCP servers, and there's no tooling standard, there's no discovery standardization, there's no anything standardization. And then now they've got all these MCP servers everywhere being gobbled up and used. And you guys it sounds like, are trying to get in between that and provide some accountability in the same way we are, I would say, at a layer back.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, and I mean, for us, the main thing is to be able to iterate on our approach to context engineering in a way that makes sense. Like, let's say, so one thing we do, there's one way of running our tool where we translate any number of upstream tools and MCP servers down into three. It's list what's available, get more details about the SDK, basically, and then execute code. So we're translating all that, turning it into three tools, and letting the agent more efficiently use the tools. And let's say we want to change the prompt of the execute tool, or sorry, not the prompt, the description of that tool, because we think if we word it differently, it'll work better on the open source models. That's that knowing the result of that one sentence change in that description is actually really hard. So that's the main thing, is like, we don't want to push out changes to description and ruin the flow for some user.
But it could improve it. It could make it successful too. It could, that's the goal, right? Is to enrich, enhance, elevate that context that comes with it, maybe in the individual MCP server, but bring it together into a much richer, that's going to be more, much more refined context window that's going to be successful.
Exactly. Yeah. And then the other thing we really want is, so that translation into three tools, that's one way of engineering like the right context window for an agent to use these things. There's other techniques that we're building, virtual file system technique, where we just give it bash tools, execute. So we can go learn about the SDK with grep and whatever it needs. So look at the types, look at what functions are available, and then execute. We want to be able to say, if you're using Anthropic, Sonnet, 4 or 5, this is the best technique. If you're using Opus, this is better. We want to make that whole map as well for recommending models and what techniques are best, because the techniques are changing so quickly. I'll just be provide that guidance.
Can be that catalog and guidance and runtime inline guidance in the moment too, not just like, oh, go read these docs and here's how you should craft it. It's like, how do we pivot and switch in the moment?
Yeah, exactly.
And I like that a lot. I like that. And I see, I mean, for me, like I still very focused on governance but I learned a lot working with large enterprises about the realities of governance and realities of API products and API design first and all these things coming up against the realities of operations. And I just don't always feel people are going to, the world's messy and
Yeah.
we don't always have the time to do what's necessary. And we make a lot of decisions. And I think what you're addressing, it reflects a very messy landscape, but
Yeah.
a real landscape. And then how do we make sense of that? I would say that's kind of the difference in, I would say, how I'm approaching context engineering. I don't know shit about context engineering, to be honest. Like, as far as like, I'm reading what's coming and I'm absorbing, but I don't have any production experience. And then I'm talking with design partners and enterprises about it who also admittedly don't know a whole lot about it. And they're trying to figure out. But I would say you're coming at it. What I'm seeing most commonly is we have this unfolding chaos that we're trying to accomplish some business goals. Engineers are doing whatever. How do we bring the context that's needed to make it safer, but also more effective and more useful? I would say where I'm coming at it was still from and I'll have to think about this is from a center of excellence, API governance, API products, domain driven design, but from a consumption standpoint is, so I'm mapping out enterprises and going, I pull all their job postings for almost 100 enterprise organizations now. And then I parse those job postings for what services and technologies they use, what CNCF or Apache tools, what's do they use GitHub or Bitbucket, those kind of things. So and that was part of my sales kind of motion and trying to get that going. But I quickly learned I could create context windows based upon who I'm talking about, in the sense of, here's the tools who am I talking to? I'm talking to a platform, head of platforms. All right. And then I have this stack knowing what their bank uses. I can go, okay, here's what your platform generally is. Is that correct? And they go, well, yes, no. Well, we're actually doing this way. And so I get a narrower, and then I can then immediately create sandboxes for all of that and go, okay, here. And then I have all the operations. So I'll have, 9,000 operations across those, and they're all tagged. And then I can quickly organize those into capabilities or give them the ability, but it's still a lot. It's a lot of context. And I would say it's similar to what you're addressing is the tooling window and MCP, so I'm still in resource land. You're in tooling land, and you're more tactical. I'm more strategic. But that's kind of why I was excited to get you here is how do we come to a meeting of the minds when it comes to context engineering and play in both fields.
Definitely. So. Yeah. And ideally people are doing both. They're thinking strategically about their assets, their open APIs, their descriptions, and they have a perfect map and you've helped them get there. Now it's time to turn on the agents, and the agents will both have the right definitions in front of them, good descriptions of what's available, and then the tools they need to effectively manage those descriptions and execution environments. That's the ideal state. So
yeah,
maybe in 5 years we meet.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and I think that's the purpose of these conversations. And then can we share artifacts along the way and facilitate each other's work? And then can we have a conversation about the open source aspect of what we're building, as well as the commercial aspect, like where are we making money? And what, because I'm producing all these open API definitions, and I'm just getting to the point where I'm getting pretty robust with the examples that I have for them, so that I can. So I have a set of open API for Notion, default examples, request and response, happy and unhappy paths. But then I'm at the point where, okay, you're a graphic design team within an enterprise. What do those examples look like for that use case? And I can swap out all the examples for that use case. And so I'm starting to get there, and I want to put a lot of those examples out, different scenarios, so that when people are testing their agentic workflows, they, and providing mock HTTP REST, but also MCP APIs, so people can play with and understand that. So how are you thinking about one, back to the governance is policies and control, an oversight within that MCP layer. In that context, those descriptions get changed. What can and can't happen? Are you thinking about any sort of control plane or control layer to give more, or
Yeah.
visibility or traceability or observability? Like, what are you thinking there?
Yeah. So on this point, um, primarily we are dealing with enterprises that are converting OpenAPI to MCP. That's kind of the bread and butter use case. That's the fastest way to start playing with this stuff. And so because of our time at Sideko, a lot of tools for improving specs and getting
Good.
them in good shape. So yeah, we use a linter. We've set some rules that are specific. Now we have two linters. We had one for SDK generation where we made sure all the examples matched the schemas. That was something. If we had a bad example, we generate some code that didn't actually match the schema, and then the tests fail when it hits the mock server. So that's something we were checking for. But in MCP generation, it's a different set um, of rules that are important for creating that MCP server. The description and the examples being less important and the description being more. So something like silly we look for is a lot of times these open API specs just have the operation has a description, and then the field that's supposed to be a longer description of what it is, people just have the same thing. It's like deletes a pet, and then description deletes a pet. Getting that, we've a linter to basically make sure that that's not happening and that we're actually getting proper
Yeah.
descriptions. Things are going to become tools. So that's as far as we've gone there. And you're right to point out we're more focused on cleaning the mess or making things work in a messy environment. Like um, if someone has a description that's far too long, the technique that we're using, this code mode technique, actually makes that manageable because we're not shoving the whole thing up front in the context window. We're letting the agent explore dynamically and rather than filling it up right up front. So that's as far as we've gotten with it.
Yeah.
Is there a real description of what this does? Yes. Good. Okay, let's deploy it, and then let the agent manage the window if things are too long or messy.